So, is impermanence good news, bad news, or both? I think it's mostly good. Stay tuned. My name is Pablo Das. I am trained as a Buddhist teacher and also as a holistic wellness coach. I work with people around the resolution of trauma and recovery from addiction. My website is causesofwellbeing.com. And today, I want to talk about impermanence. Now, several years ago when I first moved to Los Angeles, I'd gone out to dinner with a friend. We'd had this great dinner, and we went to a secondhand clothing store, and we were trying on, hats and things, and it was a great night, and we were on our way back to where we parked, a couple blocks away, and I remember I was crossing the street, and I said literally out loud, I said, "God, I'm so happy right now." And then as I was finishing that sentence, I looked across the street and I saw that my car, which was this really cool, like an old school boxy Mercedes, I think from the 80s. I think there's a song about that. It had a green sparkly paint job. I bought it from a friend, so it had sentimental value. The car had been hit and it was totally demolished. Like the trunk was in the back seat. It was like gone. And I remember in that moment, I had the thought, oh, okay, so right now it's like this. Now that phrase, right now it's like this, comes from a Buddhist teacher, a monastic teacher who's also someone who writes books and things. And this was his kind of trademark phrase, right now it's like this. And what that phrase does is a couple of things. One, it acknowledges the constant changing nature of life, the changing nature of reality. One moment you have a car and the next moment you don't. And so that phrase, right now it's like this, is a way of being sort of acknowledging that things are constantly changing. And it's expressing a willingness to meet the moment as it is. So it was interesting because I also had the thought, that I've trained I was probably 20 plus years into my practice. I was in my 40s at the time. And I remember thinking, I've practiced all these years for a moment like this. Now, I had all the reasonable stress of the moment. The fact that I had to get home, for example, the fact that I had a car that I really loved and that I'd actually put a lot of money into was now gone. So I had all the appropriate feelings of stress, but there wasn't this extra suffering, this extra layer of suffering on top of it. The why me, oh, what bad fortune. Thank you, FedEx. All of those kind of things. Like there's an added layer of suffering that was just not present because of this sort of willingness that came from my training to just meet the moment as it was. And so I always remember that as a cool example of how the wisdom of impermanence, when it's integrated into your life, can be really helpful. So I started at the top of the video by asking the question, is impermanence good news or bad news or both? And well, here's what I mean by that. Fact is that impermanence, when it comes into contact, let's put it this way, when we're experiencing something painful, impermanence is mostly good news, because we know that impermanence means that whatever unpleasant feelings we're experiencing will eventually end. Now, this is, a good example is if you've ever lost somebody, say somebody passed away or you went through a breakup. It's pretty obvious that the most intense part of the experience will happen towards the beginning. On the day that you break up, on the day that you lose somebody, those are where, generally speaking, the most intense feelings are. And it's kind of like, and you know that, well, some people don't. Here's the thing. If it's your first time losing somebody, and you don't really understand that the feelings that you have will go through a kind of process that they begin more intense, and over time they will diminish to the point where you'll have some kind of resolution to the feelings. If you know that, it's really helpful to acknowledge that painful things are impermanent. Now the pain isn't like linear. It doesn't just go from intense on some predictable trajectory. It's more like the stock market. Like if you zoom out and you look at a stock over the course of 5 years, you'll see an upward trajectory predictably. But if you zoom in on the moments, the weeks or the months or the years, you're going to see that the experience will be kind of an up and down experience within the trajectory. And that's how, sadness and loss and loneliness and grief is after you lose somebody. You may go a week and feel like, oh, I'm kind of getting somewhere, and then have a weekend of just utter pain. But the overall trajectory is that it will change, and that change is likely to look like being intense at the beginning and something like resolved towards the end. So pain or impermanence is good news when we're experiencing pain. Now, when we're experiencing pleasant things, it's not such necessarily great news. So, for example, if you sit and you happen to be at the beach when there's a really beautiful sunset, you can, if you stop and really are present, you can watch the unfolding, changing. You can almost track it in real time, where it kind of does its thing. It does its sort of, kind of, the sky's normal, and then it starts to get red, and then it gets really intense, and it spreads, and then it sort of starts to resolve. Now, we don't suffer particularly over sunsets. Right now, one of my favorite bands of all time is on their final tour. So that's not preferable, and there is some suffering around that. Actually, the band means a lot to me. When we get to something like grief over a death or a breakup, this is much more difficult for us. But if we acknowledge that even pleasant things are subject to change and subject to ending, then that can also be helpful. It's not great news because it means that everything that we love, we will suffer about at some point as it changes, as it comes to an end. And so the question can come up, and I was just talking to a good friend about this. The question comes up, well, if there's pain in life, and that's predictable, and then all of the good things end, then why do anything? And if you think about, it's an appropriate question, but if you think about it, well, do you not eat a sandwich because you know that it will end? Do you never listen to a song because the song only lasts 4 minutes and then it ends? And then, so does it mean that we don't have a relationship just because it ends? No, of course not. But what it is an acknowledgement. Well, let me put it this way. There's 3 reasons to acknowledge the impermanence when it comes to pleasant things. So number 1 is that when we acknowledge that the things that we love, the things that bring us comfort, the things that are pleasant to us end, then it encourages us to be more present. I used to have a friend, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was living with a friend of mine who were living in the same place. And this person was also practicing Buddhism, so we were kind of working with this acknowledgement of impermanence. And we used to say to each other, like if I left the house, we would pause and I would say, I hope I get to see you again. And in that is a kind of acknowledgement that, not that we were expecting anything to happen that day, but if you say that for enough days, one day you'll be right? One of us will, in fact, not come home. So there's this acknowledgement of just, hey, I hope, it's most likely I'm going to get to see you again, but I hope I do. And in that exchange, there was this moment of pause and just appreciation. So acknowledging the impermanence of pleasant things allows you to be more deeply present with things while they're there. And this is really important. So point number 2, if you acknowledge the impermanence of pleasant things, then you suffer less when they end. So this is sort of like way that integrating the wisdom of impermanence, really understanding that everything's subject to change and everything ends. When it does end, it's almost like the example with a car. Oh, well, I've been expecting this. That there's a willingness to meet that change with presence. Now, again, it doesn't mean we don't suffer. Well, let me put it this way. It doesn't mean we don't feel pain. But the suffering that is extra, that we layer on top of it when we go, well, why did this change? Why did it end? Well, because that's its nature. Cars end. Cats. I have cats who have passed away. The nature of a cat is to eventually pass away. If you know this coming in and you say, oh, I expected this, it's not that you don't experience pain, but there's a layer of suffering that is sort of peeled off the top that we don't have to push against what's just true about the nature of things. So you suffer less. Point number 3, and this is a much deeper thing. It's part of a deeper process of really taking a hard look at life. What is the nature of existence? What are its characteristics? What actually happens? What constitutes life on life's terms? And there's a way in which, when we see that the impermanent nature of just about anything that we can experience, physically, emotionally, psychologically, we see that things are subject to change and bound by their nature to come to an end. This is a way of sort of coming into harmony with life as it actually is. And that's a process, to be willing to look at life and see it on its own terms, not the way we want it to be, not the way we wish it was. We age, we get sick, people die, we get disappointed, there's loss, there's separation. All of this is just the nature of being alive. If we can actually come to terms with that, to accept it, then that sort of like way of living in harmony with the way things actually are is a great relief. Okay, so that's everything that I have to say. I hope this is useful to you. If you're interested in one-on-one support, I have a website called thecausesofwellbeing.com, and you can reach out to me there, and I can see if I'm the right person to support you in your process. Okay, and if you haven't heard the podcast, Causes of Wellbeing, I have a lot more time and space to add additional commentary with each of the themes. So that's distributed on all the places. So just look up Causes of Wellbeing podcast, and I'm sure you'll find it. Okay, that's what I have to say. Cheers. Thanks. Bye.